Hello and welcome to the 905 podcast. My name is Roland Tanner, and today we don't have Joel. Joel is on a plane somewhere warm, I think. Um, Instead, we have a returning guest, Ajay Sharma, who we spoke to a few weeks ago about the election in Mississauga in particular, and delighted you're joining us again today. And we're going to do a kind of 905 roundup uh, kind of episode
Mhm.
and talk about a few stories that are happening around us at the moment.
Good to go.
So
Whenever you're ready with, let's start.
yeah, so one story that caught Joel and my eye before he left was uh, an article in the Hamilton Spectator, and it's also on the other news places, that the Canadian Tax Court branch, I guess, in downtown Hamilton, kind of suddenly shut up shop last week, um, citing safety concerns following. Uh, there was a shooting in downtown Hamilton right outside the court, right outside a number of kind of federal and provincial offices um, uh, 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 on the 28th of June. So uh, now this was kind of a recurring thing. The court had actually closed down about a year ago in response to the proximity of homeless encampments,
Mhm.
and again citing sort of security as the reason. And reading the newspaper, the usual people make the usual comments of like, this is very concerning and blah blah blah. And my feeling was that this isn't a story that really should be read at face value. It's like, are we really saying? I mean, no one's saying how downtown Hamilton is perfect. No one is saying that. But we really concerned for our safety to that level when you go to downtown Hamilton that you can't even open a federal office. Um, that was what struck me. I don't know, Ajay, what are your thoughts about that?
Couple of things as we were talking, right? Something you mentioned just now, which was interesting, is one of the issues they raised was safety due to the homeless encampments, right? Well, that's the federal government's prerogative right there. They're the ones who are in charge of this file, so they're basically causing one issue, you know, issue of having people unhoused, and then they're using that as one of the justifications for moving away from where they are right now. But it doesn't bode well whatsoever because what are you telling people basically? You're telling them Hamilton is so unsafe that a federal government cannot have its tax court. So now you have a couple of issues at play, right? You have access to justice, right? Downtown Hamilton is the easiest place for most people in the greater Hamilton area to get to. And if you're, someone who relies on public transit, it's easier to get down there
Mhm.
than, Ancaster or Dundas or wherever they may choose to put it, because guess what? Federal tax court isn't just for one percenters, it's for everybody, right? So that's number one. Number two, another point that I mentioned to you earlier is downtown revitalization. They've been talking about it in Hamilton for decades. And when the federal government themselves are saying it's too dangerous for us, where is that actually going to leave? Any thoughts of spurring more development, more investment, mixed allocation housing, whatever you want to call it? Like, how does that really help the city? Like, flippantly, I could say they have courts in Baghdad, right? Right.
Yeah,
And places
I
like
think that's
Fallujah,
a I think that's a
right?
really good point. I think that's a really good point that we there have been far more dangerous times in the history of many places in the world, and the courts stayed open.
We don't
I'm
even have to go.
assuming,
We don't even have to go to the Middle East. Just
uh,
go to Detroit in the 1980s and the
yeah,
90s. It was a hellhole for gun violence and murders. Go down to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, even there. There are federal courthouses there. Like, no one's afraid to go to court. Well, they're afraid to go to court, but no one's afraid that we can't have a court open here. So it just seems like one of the most
uh,
absurd things that I've heard a federal government do in terms of access to justice and who it's actually going to penalize.
I mean, my feeling is that this is the kind of thing that a court can do because uh, judges are basically the person who makes that decision is a judge, and judges can kind of do things in a way that other people can't.
Mhm.
They don't need to consult. They don't need to. And if they want to make some kind of a political statement or make things uncomfortable for someone, they can kind of do that in a way that usually you can't. But I mean, so that's my kind of suspicion is like, is someone making some kind of point here? And actually, I found it quite annoying and kind of offensive that they've kind of, by the complaints they've made over the last 2 years, kind of blended. Um, it's like you're treating homeless people the same as
Right. Yep.
gangsters.
Mhm.
It's like no, those are quite different things and quite different urban issues. Again,
R-
not pretending that everything is great, but are you seriously saying that a court, which can call on, which probably already has like security staff on site anyway, they
Right.
certainly do at the provincial court when I've been
Yeah.
in there.
Mhm.
There's security screens, there's police. Are you really saying that that cannot be kept safe, whereas the supermarket that's right next door, they're not staying home from work because
No,
they think it's too big.
everybody's walking in there packing so their dozen eggs don't get stolen.
Yeah.
We all know this. We all know what Hamilton really is. Here's a question for you. If Matthew Green were not the MP for that riding,
Well,
would
yeah.
that court move? That's
Yeah.
like if it were a Liberal MP in downtown Hamilton, which is last I checked, is NDP held, would that court be moved? And was this a political decision? Or sorry, an administrative decision or bureaucratic decision backed by political maneuverings, or was it an independent decision made by the bureaucrats? And if it was, did their political masters have any input into it, saying this is not a good thing for access to justice, and more so the optics of slamming Hamilton in terms of a safe place to be, and secondly, even the people catching strays here, pardon the pun, of the homeless encampments, like what does that really say about how the federal government approaches um, downtown cores, which are not Toronto?
Yeah. And my feeling is, and I could be completely wrong, it's definitely not an area where I have a whole lot of experience. My feeling is that any other kind of type of government office would not be able to do this kind of thing easily and would not be able to do it kind of unilaterally. People would have to be consulted. You'd have to consult the
Passport
relevant
office, for
minister.
example, you couldn't move
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I think that judges are inherently like the chief administrator of this court is a judge, and they can do things with a kind of unilateral nature that isn't available to most other people in most other lines of work. And although I mean, to be fair, the person in charge has apparently changed over the last year, so it's like two subsequent judges who've both sort of raised issues about security. I still, if I had to make a guess, I would say it's nothing to do with the political federal government. But this is a local administrator who doesn't like where they're working and wants to make a kind of statement about that. Could be completely and utterly wrong, but that was my feeling, and I kind of feel that Mayor Horvath is a bit too um polite about this. I mean, there is more. There have been more shootings this year. Gun crime is on the increase.
Right.
Not saying that that is acceptable or it's a bad situation.
You ever correlated
However,
gun crime with city hall expenditures on the police? Have you taken a look at that before? I'm not saying anything right now, but you should
we
sometime take a look at that.
yeah, I mean, we reached out to a counselor and we weren't able to make it with the timelines right
Right.
now, but perhaps a future week we might still do that because I'd be really interested in their take. Um, uh, I mean, the police budget has been going up and up and up. We certainly know that, and in fact, there was an attempt this year to reduce the amount by which it was always going up, which caused its own problem. Actually, the same councillor was involved in that story.
Mhm.
So many would claim that the police are not underfunded, that's for sure. But yeah, and yet we have this gun crime problem. So yeah, no one's denying the problems, but I think you can still kind of keep it, like you say, you know, um, nations have gone through wars, and the courts still have to operate. You know,
In
you still have to.
developed nations have gone through civil war. Um, place it a name of a city that you'll know, Belfast.
Yeah,
Um, you had the Civil War, you had the war there with the IRA pitted against the British government. Bombs were going off, but guess what? Courts still functioned. Bombs, bullets, whatever. And here we're being told that, and I'm not undermining or minimizing gun violence by any stretch, but what you're seeing in Hamilton is not even a drop in the ocean compared to what you see in other parts of the world. And I think you may be right, if not a little bit completely. Somebody may just not like their place of work and they may have the ability to shift, right? If
yeah.
if most people could choose where they want to work, they would do it. Right.
Well, yeah, just like, hey, I went to law school for a whole bunch of years. Do I really have
Right.
to work downtown Hamilton? That's a very cynical interpretation and is purely hypothetical. I want to get sued by the head of the court.
No,
uh,
I mean, but you're
but
just
I'm
looking at
feeling,
people's interests. You're just
yeah,
looking at even hypothetical. I mean, you don't even have to keep it in hypotheticals. Let's look at it this way. So when we had the lockdowns over COVID, many people then learned the art of working remotely. And today, what do people would they would rather not even go to their downtown Toronto office or in Burlington or Oakville where they could have really nice offices with all the amenities. They would much rather say, you know what, I can be more effective and I'll be more from a mentality point of view happier working at my home office, right? And so then you have that pull. So there's something you don't necessarily we don't necessarily have to go totally cynical and say some hypothetical administrator said I am going to move my offices here because no, it could be a case of people may just want to shift their place of work because it may be much more mentally and psychologically effective for them to work there, just like so many people still want to retain the work remotely, whether it's a hybrid model, mixed state, whatever it may be, because we've reached that point. However, the problem with the tax court and any court is that it's a public service.
mm-hmm.
Hamilton Street Rail, the bus service does not just go to nice areas of town, it goes everywhere. It goes to Upper Wentworth, Barton, it goes into Westdale. It'll go everywhere because it has to. And the same with the court. It's a federal court. It's paid for with our federal tax dollars. So why can't it be in the most strategically available and accessible place? And if there is a problem, guess what? We have a federal police force as well.
Yeah.
Why don't you?
Yeah. I mean, seriously, do not tell me that don't tell me that ordinary people are going to their jobs every day downtown Hamilton uh, without the assistance of without the
Armed security.
armed security, bulletproof glass, and scanners that you have to walk through if you go into any court.
Or
You know,
maybe there's a person on the bench there who's feeling like they're living in, Sicily right now. They think there could be something under their car and they just don't want to be there. Like it's absurd.
mm,
It's totally,
yeah,
totally absurd.
yeah, and I think it's fair to call it out. At the same time, is not downplaying whatsoever the
Nope.
seriousness of gun crime, or the people that were, I believe, killed in the incident on July the 28th, and sort of
Right.
so-called uh, innocent bystanders who get caught in what is basically some kind of a gang thing. Um, uh, yeah, not downplaying any of that, but
But but Roland, the same thing would happen at a strip mall or a plaza near where I live,
yeah,
and Pizza is not going to close up shop and say it's too safe to serve pizza. It's not safe
yeah.
enough to serve pizza. Or
I mean,
Sobeys is not going to move out of that plaza either. I mean, there are larger things to think about here. And what the intrinsic question is, why did you move? Explicitly, why, right? Not don't give me this, or this, just exactly what were the number of stated reasons. And two, what was your calculus in offsetting any impediments to access to justice? If you really want to get down to it. And that's the key point there. There's the optics and there's the imagery of tarnishing Hamilton's image. But there's also the real pragmatic questions of who is this going to impact and what are you doing now to ensure that they don't get impacted? Because that's, someone could quite reasonably say that this is like an impediment to me. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I'll be interested to see where it ends up, and there is some kind of move towards, remote court sessions, etc., etc. Because like, well, fine, if that's what you're really wanting to do, that's
mhm.
fine, but just make the case for that. Don't
Be
blame it
honest about
on
it.
other stuff.
Just
Yeah,
be honest about it.
yeah. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on it and we'll see what happens. I'll be interested to see. Um, let's go on to our next story, which is very much in your ballpark, so to speak. Last time we had you on, we were talking about the Mississauga election, and well, what's been going on in Mississauga since the election with the bright, shiny new mayor that has taken over?
Extraction of nails and teeth. Um, okay, I have a quiz for you. I have actually no. First, let's start off this way. So, um, for those of you who don't know, and goodness, it's hard not to know these days based on who the mayor is. So Mississauga had a by-election in June for a new mayor to replace outgoing mayor Bonnie Crombie, who's the leader of the Liberal Party of Ontario. And during that election, um, the then candidate, Carolyn Parrish, stated that, you know what, I'm not going to use these strong mayor powers. These are powers that the government of Ontario gave mayors to make certain unilateral decisions in hiring and firing chief officers of City Hall, like the city manager, CAO. And traditionally, this had been done in a consensual manner amongst council as a whole, right? So they would sit and they would discuss it. But then Doug Ford came in with his plan saying, let's dispense with that. Let's just give the mayor the ability to do this on their own terms, which is a bit of a problem because it breaks the previous consensual decision-making model. And it can also introduce that nasty word in municipal government that should not be there. And that's called politics or partisanship, right? Or hiring a buddy. Not that I'm saying this is what happened here, but that's the fear. So Doug Ford overturns traditional methods of governance with this in mind. Ontario is committed to building 1.5 million new homes, right? I think by 2037. I think don't quote me on the date, but it's in the 30s. And they introduced these strong mayor powers to ensure that mayors had the ability to put in committees and put into effect all the policies and the planning that you needed to build these houses. And for its part, Mississauga has to build a few 100,000 as part of Doug Ford's housing strategy. First question is where? Where are you going to build them? Like you find me,
Mm.
you find me unincorporated, unused land in Mississauga that you can do this. You really can't. You may have to knock
Mhm.
down places. That's number one. So the mayor replaces the city manager, Shari Lichterman, with no reason. So going against what she said in the election campaign. The solicitor, he resigns. We can't say that that wasn't unconnected to the mayor's move or vision. And there been another individual high-ranking member that has left. And what it's looking up to be, if you go through some of the writings by Noor in Toronto Star, is that the mayor is kind of using these powers not in the manner that they were intended to be used. And the mayor is using these powers to appoint people, and politicians do that, that she is more trusting of or knows. Cynically, you could call them lackeys, but let's back away from that for right now. And people that she trusts and her confidants. But that's not how municipal government worked in Ontario. That's not the tradition of it. And I'm not saying go back to the 1930s. I'm saying, why do you have to do this on your own without consulting council? And now you have councillors, sitting councillors who are upset with what's happening, but will not speak up because they cannot speak up because the mayor can reassign them to different committees too and make their life hell. So now you basically have, a bit of a charade going on where this has happened. And this leads us directly into something that Mississauga announced last week. And what was it called? I'm just going to bring it. It's called the Community Improvement Plan in Mississauga, where they are allocating $44 million. And this is the best part, to encourage more affordable rental housing. So they're going to work with developers and other stakeholders and whatnot to see if we can, create a better structure in which more people can get rental housing, because buying a house in Mississauga, you can't sell enough kidneys to buy a house here, right?
Yep.
Here's your quiz, Roland. And if Joel was here, this would be even better to see both of you scratch your heads at this. This is the city of Mississauga now. It's on their website. I'm not making this number up. How much do you think you need as an income to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment in Mississauga? What should your income be? This is
Well,
reported on the city of Mississauga's website. Looking at it right now, and I will read you the paragraph if you give me a guess. You want me to give you some numbers to take a guess?
sure.
50,000. There's the first one. 75,000. Second one. 100,000. 125,000 or 150,000. I'll give you increments of 25,000. Which one do you think is the number? And it's gross, by the way. Let's be clear. It's gross income.
All right.
Oh, see?
I'm
Look,
being realistic. I
if
would.
those of you who are listening, if you could just see the man's face right now, he's kind of flummoxed at this one.
I'm gonna. In a sane world, it could be no more than 75,000. I'm gonna guess that I'm gonna go for 100,000 and hope it isn't higher than that.
Give the man a silver dollar. I'll read it. Market rents in Mississauga far exceed affordable rent levels for even moderate income renters. Rental households require a yearly gross income of almost $100,000
Yeah,
to afford a one-bedroom apartment in the city. This is the best part. This is where you
one
have to
bedroom.
read. Here,
Yeah.
read this part now. The city's CIP, this program, will help developers, landowners, and homeowners offset some of the costs required to deliver new units at affordable rates. And I'm going to ask you the next question. If you're a landlord, in what world are you offering neutral rates? No
Oh,
benefit, no negative to you, no negative to the renter. In what world would you go and buy a secondary, a third, a fourth, a fifth unit? In which world would a consortium buy a condo building and say, we're going to make affordable housing? Because you don't. And I
no.
don't know who would, unless they are
Well,
very, very pious.
basically nobody has, or very few people have, since the late 60s. Since the kind of, if you look around any city in Ontario and you look
Mhm,
at the rental accommodation,
mhm.
it was all built in the 60s
Yeah,
or earlier.
yeah,
I just moved out of a unit built in the 1930s. Great building, well built. It was it was a bit rough around the edges, but it was
right.
for me a reasonable price. For many other people, not a particularly reasonable price. And by the time I left, it had gone up by $400 a month.
Right,
For any new renter.
right,
Um, but yeah, it's all ancient everywhere. Because yeah, if you're building condos, you're building single
right.
family homes. That's what the developers want to build. And there was the change. The federal government and I think the provincial government then followed suit, in taking kind of some of the tax off
Hmm.
the developers for developing rental accommodation.
Right.
A great move, and like many people have been advocating for that, and that's a good thing. But does it really fundamentally change the landscape for developers of, yeah, I mean, they've got to be able to make a buck. And I mean, that's actually why, even as someone who basically was and is a renter, um, I don't actually really like the idea of rent control, because not rent control as implemented, because what's the motivation for the landlord? Someone moves in and stays there for 20 years. You're basically paying for them to live in your building by the time they leave.
Yeah.
And I want to help renters, but it has to come from the supply side, not kind of just, sticking a a flat law that says you cannot raise your rental rates. Um,
Well,
because why would you go into it?
it's certainly not going to help by constructing the 413 and building single dwelling homes,
No.
that type of property either. But look, um, if you're a homeowner, and if you're thinking of doing this, it's there's no benefit for you. And I know landlords get a brutal rap because there are some excessively awful, whether they're
Mhm.
corporations or individuals, that they're very predatory. And an example of the predatory nature was, and you brought up the point where you could live somewhere for 20 years and they're basically subsidizing you at that point, right?
Mhm.
There's where my parents used to live in Mississauga. It was a 3 bedroom apartment, condo apartment kind of thing. And they were, when I believe when they moved in, paying around $1,400 a month. Now they moved in 2008 to that place. Okay, so a fair while ago, but still, $1,400 a month at that time was kind of steep for a 3 bedroom, and not great area either, but nonetheless. And then after my dad's passing, my two brothers and my mom decided to leave, so they left in 2021, and that I took a look at the unit that went up for rent, $2,700. And it was
Yep.
gone just like that, just
Mhm.
gone. And I asked my mom, like, could you afford to pay for this? And she asked me what the rate was. I told her $2,700. She's like, oh my goodness, we were paying nothing near that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Their new
Yeah.
mortgage payment is less than that.
Yeah. It's 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 brutal. I mean, it's as I say. I mean, I saw the place I just moved out of a
Mm,
couple of months ago. Um, it was 1,800. Actually, it was under 1,800 when I moved in, and it was put up when I moved out. It was over 2,200.
yeah.
That's in 2.5 years. Um,
I-
but it's the supply that's the problem because there's nothing new being built,
but there's
and
no but there's no demand for it from the developer side. There's no
no,
there's no there's no profit motive.
yeah, absolutely all the development that happens in this province is the wrong development for the wrong people in the wrong place. I mean, it's right for the developers, and they're just trying to ultimately they're just trying to make a buck. Some of them do it better than others in terms of being more better human beings than others.
Mm.
But ultimately, we don't live in a socialist utopia. We live in a capitalist society, and they're trying to make the most money they can. The market all pushes towards private, private development for single family homes, families. That's the cheapest kind of stuff you can build, and the least problematic. And if you're building high rise, then you want to be building for the people with the most money. So you build condos.
So
We,
is housing a privilege or a right?
I think it's a right. I mean,
Not in
really,
Mississauga, it's not. I mean,
yeah,
look, we're
no.
we're look, there are, if you go to Erin Mills, the Erin Mills Town Center area in Mississauga. So for those of you who don't know, it's Eglinton and Erin Mills Parkway. It used to be barren land by the Credit Valley Hospital, and now they're unending site of condominium developments. And then if you go other parts of Mississauga, say the Ninth Line lands, that abut the 407, the lands that Mississauga bought from Milton years ago for development. None of those properties, whether townhomes, condos, semis, or detached, none of them address what the city is purporting to want to address in terms of making housing more affordable. Is $100,000 the new poverty line in Mississauga? That's a legitimate question to ask, because what if you're a new immigrant? Where are you going to move? Right? Most of them, if you come from the part of the world where I'm from, if you're India, Pakistan, right?
Mhm.
Middle East, you tend to move to places where you have people of your own background, right?
Mhm.
Whether you're Italian or Jewish or even English, it doesn't matter. You move to places where your people are to settle first, and then you move. So now they're living in dangerous dwellings, whether in basements. There's a great underground economy of dangerous dwellings, like unsupervised, unregulated basement development, or they live 20 to a house, breaking all fire
Mhm.
codes, whether you're in Mississauga or Brampton. Because we all know there's a lot of also intergenerational houses and families too, where they all live
Mhm.
together, stacked on top of each other, and they all work these jobs. Cumulatively, they'll probably make $200,000 a year as a family, but they can't get a mortgage because individually they make 20 grand a year, right?
And we're still in this situation. So under, long ago, under the Liberals, back before Doug Ford was had brought his wonderful style of government to us. Even then, we had the situation where there are basically two types of development you can do in this province easily. One is single family homes on greenfields, and the other is downtown high rises. Um, those are the ones you can, because what you can't do is go into which is basically what Mississauga is at this point. This is basically entirely what Mississauga is. You cannot go into those existing single family neighborhoods and say, hey, see what this house is right here. We could put a duplex or a triplex on there.
It's
You get
never going to
free family
happen.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
never
cannot do
happen.
it. Those areas are untouchable. All the other areas are entirely touchable. From the point, I mean, to raise your point that you made in your article in the Star back during the election, the cities don't actually have the power that everybody thinks they have. We have votes on shall this development go ahead, yay
Yeah.
or nay, but that's not a decision the city is really making. Uh, the OLT makes that decision when it gets appealed. There's a story in the Spectator today about the city has voted against a development in East Hamilton
Mhm.
because they don't like it. It's already been appealed to the OLT. The OLT will take 3 years and then say go right ahead.
Yeah.
Um, but in other parts of the town, in the street right next door, where it's a single family home neighborhood, what the city decides or what the neighbors decide is absolutely written in stone. No, you
Right.
will not. Thou shalt not build a condo on my single
Mhm.
family home street.
Yeah.
And that's the huge problem. That the Planning Act, as it is written and as it has been modified, is a freaking mess.
I mean,
In short.
they could also just issue a ministerial zoning order if they really want to do it. The province
But
could
I mean,
easily do that and override everything, and that'll completely show you what a sham it is if you think City Hall can make a dent. But the thing is, they it's going to sound odd, but I don't think it is. The cities still have a tremendous amount of power in terms of land use development. Right? We can't pretend that they don't. They do have a lot of statutory and administrative powers to ensure what gets built where, whether it's residential, industrial, um, or, and whatnot. But what they haven't done, if you look at various municipalities around Ontario, there are tracts of land that are open, which were previously even brownfields or other areas like that. City of Toronto did this some time ago, where they developed brownfields and they put housing there. But there's really no appetite to do this in suburban 905 areas because of the long-term costs, the overruns, the ability to justify it when the easier path is to just tear up some green space, which is prime development land. And so you're not going to have rehabilitation of land, of brownfields, of industrial sites, because people say, oh my goodness, you're living on the property of the old Stelco mill. Remember 3 Mile Island and places like that? And I'm like, really? I mean, that's where we're going with this. So then there's also that it's a complete short-termism as well. And is it a real good play for developers also to start looking at, oh, look, there's some former industrial land over there. Why don't we make a play for that land and like hope we can persuade the city hall to like lay trunk lines and infrastructure so that we can put houses there, whereas it already exists where the green fields are because the roads are already going through there, and you can get the premier to build a 413 for you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's that also. It's not that there's a shortage of land in many places. It's that there's no appetite to use the land that we really should be using,
Yeah.
because that takes a lot more effort and planning and cost.
Well, and I mean, my knowledge of sort of the way cities work is they really hate. The city has so much land that it owns that it could use, but it's holding for whatever reason. But they hate using that stuff to sort of release city land that was, maybe it was for land around a railway station or something, which is perfect for high density living. To release that, say, okay, we're going to give that up so that people can live on it is always a struggle. Whereas it absolutely, there are huge amounts of sort of government-owned property around the province, whichever level of government it is, that goes undeveloped. But there's huge amounts of land that are already in developer hands, either because through speculation or otherwise, that they could develop, that they've already been granted the permission to develop on, and they don't develop. I mean, put a hypothetical to you that there is a way that other places in the world deal with this problem, and it's called council housing or municipal housing or
Sure.
public housing, where the municipality or the government or whatever says we need a bunch of housing that's reasonably affordable. Hey, why don't we just build it? We just go along to a developer and say, build it for us. There's no market involved there. They'll do it because if we offer them enough.
What's the quid pro
And
quo?
yeah, people pay rent, so we earn the money. So, sure, we're going to have to get into debt to do that, but we'll get that money back because we'll have people paying rent for 50 years. Why can't we do that in North America?
Because the system is not set up. There's a much longer history of uh, whether you want to call it state welfare or the government doing something for the public good. There's much more of a, they'll use that nasty word, um, um, they'll use that nasty word socialism here without really understanding what socialism really is. I'm not saying the guy behind me was the best exponent of it, but he would have these people put into gulags in Siberia for misusing the word socialism. Um, you have more mature societies in Europe, and you have more in the UK than you have in North America, which is very much an exploitative kind of approach to development. And plus, land is limitless here, essentially, right, compared to Europe. And so we can just push people away or build bigger, build further away, and we don't have that problem. So you have that ethos in Europe where you have older societies, you have higher values of social justice. I'm not saying you don't have capitalist dogs who just want single unit dwellings. Yes, of course you do. But there's a more engaged electorate there also that will push for this, and it's not as passive. And also local politics matter there. And not only do they matter locally, but as you know, they have profound impacts in national politics because the lead up to the last British election, the Conservatives were slaughtered at the local elections, and that's the best predictor of how they're going to do. Same happens across Europe, and so it's really the sense of politics and identity in society in these places and how they view the state, right? The state is seen as a very different way. Here, the state, if you listen to the leader of the Conservative Party, he will call it the nanny state. If you listen to conservatives in the United States, they'll call it the nanny state. No, the state is there to provide, no, I wouldn't say a buffet by any stretch, but a selection of public goods to ensure that minimal levels of what's the term, welfare are maintained, whether that's healthcare or housing. That's why I asked you earlier, is housing a right or a privilege? And in Europe, it's a right. And in the UK, it's a right. Um, and so, that's the difference here. And here we're much more speculative, even in Canada. Canada is much more capitalistic than people want to believe. Much more capitalistic.
It makes me chuckle every time I hear, Pierre Poilievre or whoever sort of, trying to make out that Canada's some kind of socialist hellhole. It's like, well, like you say, it's like, good grief, look up the definition of socialism. Well, learn just a tiny bit of history to
Right.
find out what socialism is. Canada is not socialist.
It's never been socialist. It's from the time even when the French and the British came, it was basically resource exploitation. What is socialist
Yeah.
about that? It's extraction. First we were the breadbasket for the British Empire, and then we just became the breadbasket for the United States and the world for our natural resources. We just dig, extract, and sell. There's nothing socialist about it. If you want to see, you know, people often say Scandinavia, super socialist. You know what? Sure. But they're very capitalistic too. Let's not get it twisted. Um, so it's the misuse and the misapplication of the term itself. And then when you have politicians jumping on it, it makes it that much worse because if the Premier of Ontario is truly concerned about housing affordability, then there would be some legislative changes brought in. Then the government would have the government does and would use its power to institute a hard cap. Peg it to inflation if you want. Don't let it exceed inflation, right? Or peg it to a cost of living, do something like that. But you cannot just say, well, we'll let my friends, we'll let the market decide what the market decides, because that's already been decided. And City Hall, whatever municipality these go up in, they're rubbing their hands in glee because they're getting free money from the development charges. So
I like to make the point, if I'll have, if I ever were to have a sort of quote that I wanted put on my gravestone or whatever, this would be it. The market doesn't build affordable housing. The market builds slums. There are places in the world where the market builds the cheapest housing available, and they're called favelas, or they're called whatever. The market doesn't. The market makes its money from the wealthiest people, and it's not interested in providing for people who don't have money. So what fills that gap? The government. And coming back to that point about socialism, basically every country in the world is socialist and no country in the world is socialist, because it's a matter of where you draw the line. The USA is socialist with regard to a bunch of stuff because it has a safety net. It's just a smaller safety net than a bunch of other countries have. There's nowhere in the world that is completely capitalistic, that has no kind of government intervention to protect people. But some countries go further with that. So it's just a matter of where you draw the line. It's been established, to my mind, a million times over that it actually pays better to be a bit more on the side of government intervention, of using that kind of collective might that you have to protect people and to bring up the overall level of everybody at the expense of a few people at the top getting super rich. That's not socialism. That's just controlled capitalism,
Yeah.
But here we are. Is anything going to change? I don't know. I mean, the people are
Nothing really
going
has
to.
changed. Nothing really has changed. I mean, if you look at having been in Mississauga for all this time, for it'll be 30 years in a couple of years. What changes have I really seen? That's the microcosm that I'm looking at here, right? What changes, and what I've really seen is more shinier things. And your point, does the market build social housing, as you call it, or whatever? Here's the thing, from my perspective. In the city of Toronto, they had, when Tory was mayor and when Miller was the mayor, when condo units wanted to go, when developers wanted to put up condo units, they were required to put in some affordable units in the building. Now, this caused a bit of an issue. For people who are dropping $3 million on a penthouse, why am I living with somebody who is making under $20,000 a year? Why am I living with bums? Is essentially what they would say, right? I'm rich. I'm not here to be with the poor people. This is disgusting. So that was one, the optics and the really awfulness of that. But two, they gave them different entrances.
Yeah. I've seen that elsewhere in the world as well, and which is just unbelievable.
You want to demean someone? That's the way to do it. Different entrance. We may as well be in, Jackson, Mississippi in the 1950s at this point.
Yeah.
If you're going to do this, right?
Yeah. It's just, we could talk all day. You have other things to get on with in life. We should probably draw it to a close here, but it's been a great conversation, and we'll do it again soon. I mean,
whenever you want. Happy to jump in. Maybe Joel will appreciate the warm weather we're having here rather than jet setting off somewhere else for warm.
It's actually the likelihood is he's jet set to somewhere that's actually cooler than it is here, which
the weather's not so bad. It's okay because I take this over the winter any day.
Well, yeah, I guess we certainly get well, at least 3 seasons in Ontario, which I'll take over one rainy season, I have to say. Yeah, anyway, thanks, Ajay. We'll speak again
Thank
before
you.
too long, and yeah, thanks for joining us.
Been a pleasure.
Thanks.